Hi, welcome to the next episode of Post Pro with me, Kevin Kubota. This episode, we're going to continue our work in Lightroom, and what we're going to do this time is we're going to do another cool preset and a kind of vintage look to this image here. And I'm also going to show you a few more advanced controls that you can use to fix problems with a lens or your composition, or where you were laying on the ground, or whatever it is that happened to be plaguing you at the moment. And you can see we're kind of progressing from one to the next. We're getting a little bit harder, a little bit harder. Next week, we're going to tap into Photoshop's power when Lightroom just isn't enough. So let's get busy with this image. Here's a cool little wedding portrait shot, a couple in this great spot. This is McMinimans, and we did this shot. It's a McMinimans Edgefield is a cool schoolhouse they've turned into an inn, a restaurant, a pub. They have a spa. They've got a movie theater. It's just a groovy little place, and they've got several of them around Oregon. So we got permission to go and shoot in one of these. We actually did some shots in the pool in their spa. They have one of the most beautiful spas you've ever seen, and I'll show you that shot a little later in one of our upcoming episodes. But before I go any further, I need to say something. I got some flack after last week's episode for saying that I was going to turn myself into Bo Derek. My wife said I dated myself. What? Bo Derek's not hot? Maybe she's not the same. You know, maybe cornrows aren't in anymore. But yes, I'm old. I used to like Bo Derek. All right. What about Christina Aguilera? Who's hot right now? Who's hot right now? Tell me somebody hot. Tell me somebody hot. I don't keep up with these things. Only person that I really care about is my wife. Only thing I can remember before my wife was Bo Derek, so that's why I said that. Okay. All right, so let's get to this image now. Beautiful bride laying on her husband's lap here, and one is sort of a kind of a posed but off kilter. We can see got her foot kicked up, shoes off, kind of this funky little pose, and yet she's got this beautiful look. So I love the quirkiness of this shot. It was really fun, and the location was very cool, but the surrounding parts around the image were not that great. So I'm going to crop some of this off a little bit. And I also want to fix the lighting a little bit, the color balance, and one of the other things I want to fix before I do anything else are the lines. Now if you notice here, I shot with a very wide angle lens, a 24mm. There's a little bit of distortion, but also because of the angle, when I'm shooting down low, if you're sitting on the ground or shooting up high, your vertical lines can become distorted, right? There's perspective, and you can fix that in Lightroom. Okay, so what I'm going to do with this image here is I'm going to go to develop mode first, shortcut D, and on the right hand side here as we scroll down, there's several things I want to do to this image, but the first is I want to correct some of the lines. Now the perspective is what I'm looking at. It's a little bit distorted, and Lightroom has lens correction tools already built in. What do you know? They thought of everything. Well, not everything. Can't make my coffee for me, but does quite a bit. So under the lens corrections section here, you can have an automatic correction based on the actual lens that you use. Now Lightroom has a database of almost all lenses, and it will automatically fix basic things like pin cushioning or distortion in the lens, or even vignetting on the edges of the lenses. And this particular case, the distortion that I want to fix is because I was laying down and shooting up, so I've got lines that converge, okay? Or if you're standing up higher and shooting down, like in this case, I'm actually a little bit higher than center, so I'm shooting down on the bride and groom. So I'm going to turn off the automatic and go to manual. And if you look at the image here, you can see that the lines are kind of tweaked like that. The background, that bench behind them is not straight. It's a little distracting. So I'm going to take my vertical distortion slider right here on the right and tweak it a little bit to the right, and you can see now that the top of my image comes in. And that helps me straighten up those lines. Now it's a little bit torqued horizontally. You can see it's smaller on the left, gets bigger on the right when it should be square. So I'm going to tweak it horizontally so that becomes even as well. So if I take my horizontal slider here and turn it left or right, we can see the lines horizontally being fixed. Now if you turn on constrain crop, you'll see the actual final crop of the image as you adjust, and that's sometimes more helpful. Okay, so I'm just going to tweak that a little bit to the left to get those horizontal lines dialed in. The vertical looks better, and I might go a little bit more on the vertical to the right. There we go. So now I've got my lines relatively straight. I don't want to go too much because then it tends to distort the edges. Like the people with body parts sticking out, you can have like a giant hand going rah, coming out on the side or something like that, or big nose, but you don't want to do that. So tweak it just enough so it's not as distracting as it was. And then I'm going to do a normal crop with R. Remember the pirate? R. R for crop. Pull in the crop on the left. There's a lot of distracting stuff over there. I want it just to the edge of her dress. I'll pull in the crop on the right, get rid of that distracting stuff, and you'll notice I'm going to bring it right to this natural line, the wall, and it's perfectly straight now after I did that profile correction. And then I have my final crop. Ta-da! Good. Next, I'm going to adjust the color. You can see how it's a little bit yellow, and so I'm just going to go here to my color temperature slider and add some blue. Okay, just a little bit of blue. I'm going to throw a preset on here, and I'm going to use one of my presets from our Vintage Delish package of Lightroom presets. And as I scroll over them, again, you can see them in real time, so you can experiment to see what you like. But I'm going to try one. Oh, that looks nice. Rolling Stone Wash. Let's try that. Boom. I like it. It bumps up the skin tones, bumps up the mid-tones, makes it a little more dramatic, a little more punchy. Here's our before and after. You can see on this lower screen, before and after. Okay. And now let me show you how this preset's made. So in case you don't want to buy my preset, I'm very sad, I'm going to show you how to make it. All right. So you make your own. So Rolling Stone Wash goes something like this. If you look over into the column on the right, I've set my clarity neutral. I've set my vibrance up a little bit, plus 11. So those things aren't changed too much. The main thing that I'm going to change here is my tone curve. Look at this tone curve. It looks like a molehill, or depending on where your mind's at, it could look like something very different. I know what you're thinking. All right, nice little humpy dump in the middle there. And that brings the midtones up, leaves the shadows where they are, leaves the highlights almost where they are, but opens up the midtones. Boom, just adds a little kick to the mid. Next thing you're going to notice here down below on my luminance section from HSL for hue, saturation, and luminance, or you can say lightness as well, I've lightened up the orange and the red, which are primarily the skin tones. Again, I want to pop them up, make them more washed out, a little more creamy looking. So I've illuminated the oranges and the reds and taken down slightly the aqua, the blue, and the green. Now, not as much, and the changes are not as drastic as we did last week in our twilight adjustment. Remember that? These are quite a bit different actually now, and that we're much more subtle adjustments, and we're focusing more on the mid-tone curve bump to get this look, so it maintains the color a little more accurately. All right, so those look good now. Basically what we've done to create this, if you want to redo this yourself, is the hue, all the same. Saturation, I've bumped the aqua and blue saturation up, everything else is the same. And then the luminance, bump the red plus 25, the orange plus 67, and the yellow stays the same. Blue and aqua down, green down just a little bit. There are the numbers right there. Okay. The next key thing was split toning. I like to use split toning quite a bit because it's a nice little subtle way to influence your shadows or your highlights separately. So I want a little warming to the highlights. You can tell here I put this color that's kind of a warm, slight amber color into the highlights. And I've added it at a 24 value for saturation. So it's not fully blasting the highlights with warm tones, just a little bit, and the shadows are neutral, so I didn't touch the shadows. Here's another thing, the balance slider. Later on, when we do some cool black and whites in one of our upcoming episodes, I'll show you how to make a really bitchin' black and white. It has warm tones in the shadows, and it looks crispy black and white, but rich, vibrant, kind of like a, speaking of coffee, balance. What was I saying? A rich balance, black and white balance. And that's using this balance slider. So I'll show you how to use that a little bit later. But the main thing to know is that as you scoot it to the right, it focuses more toward the highlights or more toward the shadows. As you scoot to the left, it focuses the split toning towards the highlights or anywhere in between. Okie dokie, so those are the basic adjustments to create this image. The last thing that I want to do is to add a little bit of a fill light to the gentleman's face because he's a little bit in shadow, which is okay, but I always like to bring the light to my subjects' faces. And if you study classical art, because Leonardo da Vinci was a good friend of mine, and what he told me was that bright objects come forward, darker objects recede. And that's kind of one of the theories that I keep in mind when I'm shooting, when I'm lighting things. If there's something I want to focus on, I make sure it's the brightest, and anything else, I can minimize ugly, distracting backgrounds by keeping the light off of them. This particular image was shot with just a flashlight, a scuba diving light actually that I use. It's 500 lumen light and has this beautiful even light pattern. And basically my assistant just held it right here, shining it down on the bride's face. Okay. We had one more little flashlight shooting on her dress to kind of add some little highlights there, but basically it's two flashlights that lit this image. All right, so I'm going to add a little more light to the dude because he's not quite getting as much love as she is here. So K, Kevin's favorite tool, and I'm going to go and create a new adjustment that's going to be fill light. I want my flow down low, 20 or so, density all the way up to 100. Size my brush just a little bit bigger than his face when you consider the feather, and give a quick little dab. Okay, so there we go. Just a little bit on his face to lighten it up, get him closer to the intensity of the light on her face, and I'll leave the edges nice and dark so we can minimize the distractions around the edges, and the image is about good to go. So, a few more advanced tools we use this week. The profile corrections, the lens corrections are really great if you're an architectural shooter. A lot of these things we used to have to do in Photoshop. Now you can do them right in Lightroom. And also the automatic lens correction works really great if you use wide angle lenses or cheaper lenses. In fact, I use some cheap lenses. I'm not a die-hard, have to use the best lenses, although I do love good lenses. But I have some inexpensive lenses that I love to use because they're lightweight and they're very versatile. But one of the problems that you have is some distortion, especially in the longer zoom lenses. There's one lens that I particularly love for travel. And this long zoom lens has noticeable distortion, especially if you're shooting a panoramic or horizon. And by turning on that auto correction, it's gone. Fixes it. It's amazing. It's actually quite amazing. So if you want, you can make this part of your default so that it applies it automatically. Remember our first episode, defaults? You can include the lens correction as a default, and it happens automatically, fixes all the problems with your lenses. Life is good. So next week, tune in on Post Pro with me, Kevin. I'm going to show you how to make a really cool black and white, a very warm black and white in Lightroom that's warm in the shadows, punchy, feels like a hot coffee in the morning. And we're going to work on this really beautiful Harrell style Hollywood portrait and show you how to enhance it, and maybe a couple different versions too. So tune in next week. I'll see you on Post Pro.